Former President Donald Trump joined the Flagrant 2 podcast with my friend Andrew Schulz and his entire crew over there. And the results were actually incredible. Before we get into it, Krystal, I think you and I have been discussing it. The way that they handled this was amazing. And really what it came down to is they didn't have the, and look, in general, as people know, I advocate dressing up, treating the president, etc. But it's a comedy podcast. So in general, their theory of going into it was, let's just treat him like a normal guest. And by doing that, there was actually a lot that came out of it, both in the way that Trump obviously felt very comfortable and all of that, but it also led to some real world moments where I'm not sure Trump has ever experienced that from an interviewer. Actually, the most noteworthy moment to me came at the very end where Andrew was challenging and even interrupting Trump, and Trump let him, which was even the crazier part, about the phrase, "Make America Great Again." So let's go ahead and let's take a listen to that.
The term MAGA, Make America Great Again. I'm going to make this country great again. It's not a great country right now. It's loaded up.
It's always a great country.
It's a great country.
See, that's
it's always a great country.
Okay, but I say it has the potential, and it was a great country. I think now there's so much hatred and there's so much dissension. I think when you have people that can't walk down Fifth Avenue, when you have people that can't walk down a street, it ceases to be.
We can always be better. We can always be better.
Yeah, but you can't blindfold yourself to say.
No, I'm honest about it. But to me, I'm really proud of America because I think that I think I can be the best version of myself here. You know, I think that Donald Trump can only happen in America. Your life, what has happened to you, this is an American story.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that was interesting. I'm shocked Trump let him talk, actually. It shows that Trump likes him. Having interviewed Trump in the past, it can be very difficult to interrupt in that regard. But it was an interesting moment to me, both in the challenge. Also, look, no surprise, Trump's not going out in flagrant out of the goodness of his own heart. He's doing it to try and reach the people who watch comedy podcasts, which is predominantly young men between the age of 18 to 35. And so I was like, that is, I'd be curious. Look, obviously, I'm in politics all day long. If this is your, maybe not first exposure, but maybe your first long form exposure to Trump, I don't really know what to take away from that. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely think that there's an opportunity to move some young men their way, and that there's an opening there, and that podcasts like this help to serve that purpose. And this has been an integral part of their strategy. We saw Kamala Harris do the Call Her Daddy podcast as well. Yeah. So, they also have their own podcast strategy. But I think Trump campaign, I think it's fair to say, has leaned more into a podcast strategy this election. So it'll be interesting to see what the results are. But yeah, to go back to your point about I liked Andrew Schulz is not a journalist. He's not going to ask he didn't try to pose as I'm going to do a bunch of tough follow-ups or whatever. I'm just going to treat you the way that I would treat any normal guest. And by the way, I'm going to laugh in your face and mock you effectively to your face.
Well, we should watch that because that was a really funny part.
When it's called for. And I kind of liked the vibe of that. I think we should normalize laughing and mocking politicians to their faces more often.
Let's take a listen. This was on the basically truthful comment.
They can say what they want. I have a hard time doing it to them because I'm basically a truthful person, but frankly, she's given me so much ammunition. I don't really have to. I mean, she's a radical left lunatic who will destroy our nation. Other than that, but she'll destroy our nation.
That was great. You could see he just couldn't keep it together. You could also see Akash in the frame there, just trying to shield his eyes because he also was laughing at him. But I mean, yeah, I thought that was good. They genuinely just treated him like you would treat anybody else. He also, it was clear, was picking up on it. He started doing his bit about the weave. This is perhaps the biggest insight into Trump's mind because what he's picking up on is there have been previous leaks and criticisms of Trump, not even advisors, but also other politicians who are hey, he's rambling and he doesn't come to the point. He takes that very much to heart because to him, he calls it the weave and he believes it's part of his superpower. So he explained this on Flagrant. Let's take a listen.
I do a thing called the weave. And there are those that are fair that say, this guy is so genius. And then others would say, oh, he rambled. I don't ramble. If I start a story, what you do is you weave things and you do it. You have to have certain things. You need an extraordinary memory because you have to come back to where you started.
Yes.
You always, a weave is only good
They
if
would
you
give
come
you credit
back.
for that.
Yeah, it's true.
That you could go all the way over here and then
I
get
can
back.
go so far here or there, and I can come back to exactly where I started. Now, someday when you don't come back to where you started,
You're Biden.
then you say, no, but the weave is the way. When you're telling, like a story, I was telling a story at a rally the other day in front of thousands of people, and I started off, and then
You were weaving them up.
something in the story,
Bro.
I actually mentioned Air Force One. It was Air Force One was there. So I mentioned Air Force One, and then I said how I got $1.6 billion off the price of Air Force One. So, but then you have to come back to the story. Where was Air Force One taking you?
As I
So
was
anyway, I do a weave. I call it the weave.
There you go.
Call it
That's
the weave.
from Trump's own brain.
There was so a few things to say about that. First of all, that feels to me like that New York Times analysis of how he's gotten like more rambly and more like disjointed and angrier and all these things like that. He
Oh, of course.
read
He
that.
hates it.
As
Yeah.
much as he like loves to hate the New York Times, he's always been sort of like obsessed with what
course.
these, prestigious mainstream outlets have to say. So that's one thing. The other thing is my 16-year-old told me, Saagar, that it's a thing on TikTok where they say that Trump talks kind of like he's like a 16-year-old girl. So with the basically truthful thing, like being like, I'm like a basically truthful person.
I had not thought about that.
I hadn't either.
I don't spend a lot of time with 16-year-old girls, but it does make sense. Certainly does make sense. I could see
Basically
it.
truthful person, and like Kamala Harris is just, she's mean and nasty, and it's like, wow, that actually kind of fits.
It does fit. I mean, one of Trump's great strengths is he speaks in incredibly simple sentences. I remember back in 2016, people would criticize him for that. They're like, Trump speaks at a third grade reading level or whatever. And I was like, well, you should look at the average reading level of America because that's usually a good idea.
I do think it's fair to say that his communication is not as sharp or crisp. If you go back and listen to him in 2016, especially if you compare his debate performance versus Hillary Clinton, in comparison to his matchup versus Kamala Harris, he was way more crisp, to the point, able to more effectively do the weave, to stay on topic, et cetera, versus, in the Kamala Harris matchup, he was easily thrown off course, distracted from the main points he was supposed to hit. In fact, at the very end of the debate, you saw it sort of like click, oh shit, I was supposed to say that she's just like Joe Biden. I was supposed to hit her on these things. Let me just get it in here, before the buzzer. So I do think it's fair to say that he is not as crisp as he was in 2016, that he's not as able to pull off the weave as he once was.
He had some moments there. Well, I don't know. You weren't there for the snake, which I had to sit through many times back in 2016.
I remember it, though.
I used to be able to recite it from memory. But he had a moment where he talked about nicknames, which is really funny because he was like, you have to make the nickname like pew, like actually hit. But he acknowledges some of his best nicknames were from 2016 in the primary.
He has not had a nickname hit really for a while.
Yeah, it's like Comrade Kamala. He's like, it's hard to say.
Or
it's difficult.
Kamabla, which no one
Kamabla.
even understood what that was.
He hasn't really said that one. That one was more via text.
He said it a few times.
Has he? I haven't seen it clear. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, clearly hasn't caught on. Tampon Tim, it's okay. It doesn't hit. It doesn't. Lion Ted was just so good. I can barely describe it to people about how much it hit at that time. Even Little Marco. Low
Crooked
energy
Hillary, Jeb, these were legendary.
He tried the same. Sleepy Joe. I mean, it was good, but I don't know. For some reason, it didn't quite hit as well. But this time around, he doesn't seem to be there. He even said, he's like, well, some of my best nicknames, I can't talk about them anymore because they're all my friends now.
That's funny.
It was good.
I think Sleepy Joe, I mean, it was good in one sense because it sort of like landed and was accurate. Like the reason Crooked Hillary was so devastating is because people were like, she's corrupt.
She is crooked, literally.
And I think Sleepy Joe, like it just doesn't have the same vituperative energy. Like it's not as vicious as Crooked. It doesn't bite. Like if someone's sleepy, they're not like a threat. They're not scary. They're just kind of like, okay, they're a little drowsy, So I don't know that especially in an election where people are like, all right, it's been so chaotic. Could we just have maybe a little bit of Sleepy Joe? Like, let's just have a little sleepy time and be a little calm. I think that's part of why it didn't work. But in this election, he really hasn't had any W's on the nickname front. And back in 2016, that was a main skill. There was one other clip that I found funny from this podcast that we didn't pull, but Andrew was like, So what happened with Mike Pence? What's going on? You caught up with Mike Pence lately?
Yeah, he said, so what's up with Mike Pence? And he's like, well, Mike, he's a nice man, but he didn't do what he said what he should have done.
And the Kamala people have already taken that part and spliced it into at least an internet ad where they have that clip, and then they flash to like January 6th and people running around the Capitol calling for him to be hung, et cetera, et cetera. So I did think that was I think what he did well, Andrew Schulz, in this podcast is he didn't try to be something other than what he is.
Correct.
And yet he still did some things that were effective, that didn't take Trump too seriously, that did treat him just like he was another person who was going to come on the podcast that they were going to screw around with. And I think that was a wise and smart approach. And we're gonna have obviously politicians in the past, they've gone on podcasts. They've, even in the Obama era, he was doing like interviews with YouTubers and whatever.
Mark Maron's podcast, I remember that.
But I do feel like this is kind of a breakout cycle in terms of podcasts being central to a strategy, because you've had so many cord cutters, you're not going to reach young people going on any of the cable news shows or going on even with a Stephen Colbert, which still reaches a large audience, but not a young audience.
Correct.
So the best you would get out of that is some kind of a viral moment that gets clipped up and put on TikTok. So I do feel like this is the first election where choosing these podcasts to target some demographic group, whether it's young men or young women, where that has really become a central part of both campaign strategies, but certainly the Trump campaign has leaned into it more than the Harris campaign.
I was just reading Washington Post analysis this morning about how central the young male thesis is to the Trump campaign, how not only is the campaign run by dudes, but it very much is like a dudes rock campaign. By the way, I still think that is a very effective strategy. As I've said before, if you look at the main gains for Trump amongst racial minority groups, it's all within men. If anything, there's been more of a polarization. Young men are now more right-wing than any previous younger generation, especially in the spread with young women. So I've always said, I'm like, if you want the real multiracial coalition, it's just dudes. That's what you should be able to run on. I don't think it's necessarily good sociologically, but electorally, it could work. So clearly they think that can work. Also with Kamala, I don't want to erase, she did go on Call Her Daddy. I've seen a lot of people be like, oh, it didn't even get that many views. Guys, Call Her Daddy is not a video first podcast. It's a audio podcast that predominantly is listened and or downloaded to. I'd be willing to bet it was in the millions. The average download that they're getting is 5 million a week or something. That's crazy. It's the second largest podcast in the freaking world.
Yeah. So and I'm sure predominantly young women.
It's almost all young women. So it's like that.
And apparently Bill Krystal, who was, did you see that?
Wait, what is this?
There was some Politico playbook or some piece about the Call Her Daddy thing that they had to disclose, Bill Krystal's a founding member of
the Daddy Gang? Oh my God. Wow.
So anyway, it's young women and Bill Krystal.
I didn't even know she had paid membership. All right, well, there you go.
The last thing that I'll say about this, just to try to make a substantive political point here, is that the polling pretty consistently shows that Kamala is leading when you talk about the voters who show up every election. She's leading among those I'm there in the midterms, I'm there for the special elections, I'm there certainly for every presidential election, I'm there for the prime. That voter, Kamala Harris is leading with. The less frequent voters is where Trump has an edge. And certainly the young male demographic would be a classic less frequent voter type of demographic. And that's what they're really counting on, is to turn out those less frequent voters to come and support Donald Trump. So time will tell. Certainly past indications, when Trump is on the ballot, it usually leads to very high turnout. So, maybe that works out for him. On the other hand, if you're going to have that kind of a strategy where you're trying to turn out less frequent voters, I do think that having a more effective field operation than they reportedly have, and more money for an effective field operation, which they also are lacking in, may be a critical piece. Because if you're trying to, got to remind someone, you got to contact, did you turn out? What's your plan to turn out? Have you voted yet? Who did you, that requires a lot of energy and effort. So, that it's surprising to me that they haven't invested more in that turnout operation, that classic field operation, given how much their strategy is reliant on these less frequent voters.
Absolutely. I think it will be look, I'm here really just, I can't wait at this point now for election night, just because there's been so many like theories and tests that I'm so interested in. Like at this point, I just want to see the data. I want to see what actually happens. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.